Tuning in to Coder Conversations. Once again, visit us at www.coderconvos.com if you want to contact us or if you want to watch any previous episode. I'm your host, Kevin.
And I'm Brian Russick, professional drummer, drum teacher based out of the Suffolk County, Long Island, New York area. If you'd like to book a lesson with me sometime, you can find me at brianrussick.com.
And today we have Jimmy Morrison, writer and producer. He's produced films covering economics and the housing market. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Oh
thanks for
yeah,
coming on.
it's definitely a pleasure. So yeah, you've produced some pretty prominent films. So can you walk us through your filmography a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So I dropped out of school in 2006, 2007. I was studying economics and entrepreneurship at the University of Iowa. But once I learned how to write a business plan, I knew that I had to pursue the career in film that I actually wanted. Because if I got that degree in economics, maybe I'd get a job and I'd just never go out and try to make this movie that I had written. So I dropped out of school, and the way I funded my first projects and kind of my lifestyle while I was going on the road filming for bands and stuff like that is that I started a house painting business. And I started that right at the peak of the housing bubble. So I didn't predict it. I watched it unwind. And I realized that like all these people got caught up in it. Everybody thought, oh, you just get a house, the price keeps going up, you make all this money, you can afford multiple houses.
Right.
There's all these industries where people are selling furniture and, windows and house painting and everything. And what I realized was a lot of those people didn't actually have the cash to pay me. They were just taking out home equity loans from the bank, taking the money out of their house and, paying me with it.
Oh, wow.
But yeah. So I kind of had this unique perspective on it. But I did a torrent search for economics, and I stumbled across this book called Economics in One Lesson. And I listened to the audiobook while I was painting a house. And it was written in the 1940s and described everything that was going on with the boom and the bust and the recession and everything that was going on with the banks and all that. And I was just blown away that somebody could have written about it all the way back around World War II.
Right.
And so it gave me the idea, I got to track down these people that predicted this crash. And I didn't know how big this project would end up being, but I ended up traveling 48,000 miles, interviewing people that predicted it, and then also like trying to get these films made. And I wrote a trilogy of films. The first one is The Housing Bubble. It came out in 2019, and it looks at the run up to the housing boom, looks at the causes of it, but then it also goes back over the history of basically the booms and busts of the last 100 years in the United States. And we look at the Great Depression, and we look at the 1970s where they had high inflation and high unemployment at the same time, and they went off the gold standard. And so it looks at these points in history so that we can say, okay, if we're making these, or the people that predicted are making these claims about why this housing bubble happened, does it make sense throughout history? And I think it shows that it does. And then the sequel, the second film, is The Fall of 2008. And that gets into the response to the housing crash and how they made everything worse by bailing out the banks and having all these stimulus bills where they would print money and just hand it out to people to try to get them to spend money, essentially, which we've seen more recently in 2020, as everybody knows now.
Yes.
Yeah. And so the second film just came out this year. We premiered it in Palm Springs and at the Anthem Film Festival, which is a part of Freedom Fest, which is a major conference out there. And so we've been able to get two of the films out, and the third film is edited, and we're just trying to get finishing funds to get the music done. And so we should have that premiered next year, early next year. And that kind of wraps up the trilogy of this huge project that actually started way back in 2011. So it's been quite the journey. And even I mentioned the 48,000 miles. Since we premiered the first film, I've traveled another 50,000 miles doing screenings and, going to conferences and having booths to try to promote the films. So it's been an epic journey for sure, but that's kind of been the bulk of my career. You asked about my filmography, so I'll mention a couple other real quick. I did a film, Rock Steppy, which our composer and sound editor directed it, and he stars in it with the actor that played the Geico caveman, McManus Woodin. And that's It's an improvisational mockumentary where we traveled from Fairfield, Iowa, where David Lynch, the director, had his Maharishi University master's program in film. And my composer was doing that program. And so for his thesis, instead of doing a short film, we made this feature-length mockumentary where we went down to, the premise was two naive brothers from Fairfield, Iowa, go to South by Southwest thinking that it's going to be like American Idol. And somebody just tells you like, hey, you made it. Like, this is it. You win. So obviously they find that's not the case and end up road tripping over to LA and then back to Iowa. And it's a very ridiculous film, but it's got cameos with Pete Farrelly, who did, Dumb and Dumber, and There's Something About Mary, and like a bunch of amazing comedies. And David Lynch actually has a cameo in the film. And then there's a guy that has a pretty major role in it who was the original inspiration for the dude in The Big Lebowski.
Oh, wow.
And and he's just great in it.
That's awesome.
We had a ton of fun making that. And then the other big project I've worked on is an electrical grid documentary. I was a script consultant and we did all the motion graphics for the project. But Dennis Quaid narrated that. It won a Storyteller Award at the Doc LA Film Festival. So that, I would say that's the thing that's kind of paid the bills for me a little bit, but the Bigger Bubble trilogy, which is the housing bubble, the fall of 2008, and then next year, the Bigger Bubble, that's been the bulk of my work and existence the last 14 years.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how things come together sometimes. Like you were working in the housing business and also pursuing film, and those two kind of collided and really launched your career.
Yeah, it was very unexpected. I didn't even have any intention of doing documentaries, but I just fell in love with it once I dug into the process. There's a lot of research and a lot of just reading things that other people hadn't spent the time reading. I was reading Federal Reserve minutes from their meetings, back in 2011, and at the time, most people hadn't even heard of the Federal Reserve, and most people still haven't. But now we live in a time where the stock market and the economy completely swings on what they say at their meetings. And if they say we're going to lower interest rates or we're going to raise interest rates, it affects everybody a lot with their retirement accounts. And for us, people that don't have much in their retirement, but we're just trying to pay our grocery bills, this stuff really matters. But what I love about the documentary is that it's not a bunch of talking heads. It's not, you're not learning a bunch of vocabulary words. It's like movie clips and cartoons. It's South Park, The Daily Show. And we use these people that predicted it to tell the story, but we really use pop culture to tell the story. And then we also use a lot of archival clips of the people in the government that we believe caused it at the Federal Reserve and the presidents. And it's something that it's not a political film. It's about the economics of it. And, we don't hold any punches. The Republicans get hit just as hard as the Democrats and vice versa.
That's great.
So, yeah, it seems like, everything in history is cyclical, including housing bubbles, stock market bubbles, et cetera. So what were some of the leading indicators that you've learned of that, precedes a housing bubble?
That's a great question. Mark Twain and George Lucas both said that history doesn't necessarily repeat, but it rhymes. And I think that's a great way of looking at it. It's not going to be the same crash every time. We had the dot-com boom and the dot-com crash. That was followed by the housing boom and the housing crash. But the thing, and then now we have this bigger bubble that, it crashed a little bit during COVID, but we really haven't seen the repercussions, in my opinion, that we're going to see. But the main thing that I found, and that a lot of the people that were able to predict the crash point to, is the Federal Reserve. And the fact that what they do is they lower interest rates to try to stimulate the economy. And they do that by creating money. They print money with a computer, really. They don't even have to print it anymore. They just change the numbers on people's accounts. And it's not your account they're changing the number on. It's the biggest banks that, have those select privileges. And so they literally just change the number in their account and suddenly they have more money.
Wow.
And that, yeah, it's crazy. And we get into it in the films, obviously. But the banks too, like it's called fractional reserve banking. And we kind of have this idea of like, oh, I put my money in the bank, I can take it out whenever I want. But
Right.
when they're lending out 90% of that money or 95% of that money, and they're doing 30-year loans, but you want to come take your money out next week, like, there's a very obvious way that's unsustainable. And, we have things like the FDIC where it's guaranteed by the government, but even that is a fractional reserve thing where they don't have all the money to guarantee all the bank accounts. So they just got to create the money and print it. So to get back to like the main crux of your question, they lower interest rates, but that can't go on forever. Eventually interest rates have to go back up. And, like everybody thinks they can afford these big houses and when interest rates are being pushed down, but then reality sets in that interest rates are supposed to be based on savings. Like if you save money, that lowers interest rates. But if you do it artificially by just printing money, then everybody thinks we're wealthier than we are. We, spend out of that savings, and then eventually there's a correction. And so we saw it with the dot-com bubble where Alan Greenspan basically said to the banks, like, don't worry, I got you. If there's a crash, like I'll just inject a bunch of money. And so that led to the big dot-com boom. But as interest rates started to go back up, that crashed. And so what they did was they said, okay, we're going to lower interest rates again. We're going to lower them all the way down to 1% and keep them there for a year. And so Alan Greenspan did that in the early 2000s, and that's what started the run up in the housing bubble. And the banks were involved later on. They saw the money and they went to it. But really, it was the Federal Reserve and Alan Greenspan that led the way. And, there's other things we get into the film, like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Like the government was guaranteeing mortgages. So like, let's say a bank gives you a loan and they don't really care if you can pay it back because they can just sell that to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and they're guaranteed by the government essentially, which we found out was true after the fact. But the banks knew, like, let's just do all these loans. We'll just dump it on Fannie Mae and we won't have to worry about it. So that was another factor, but I really think the Fed was the key thing. And so what's scary about that is they lowered them to 1% for a year. They were creating $1 billion a day. That led to this housing bubble. And then as interest rates started to go back up, everything started to crash. And we had the worst financial crisis and worst recession since the Great Depression. But instead of like allowing that correction to happen, they did everything they could to prop it up. Barack Obama, George Bush, they both said we have to have a floor in house prices. We can't let house prices fall, which is great for the people that own the homes. And it's great for like bailing out things the way they are, like trying to keep things the same.
Right.
But the economy was trying to say, and like people were trying to say, the reality was like, no, we need to save more, like we can't have all this debt. And so instead of dealing with that, they said the banks are too big to fail. We're just going to bail them out, create all this money and give it to them. And so the banks are bigger than ever. And there's fewer banks because they added all these regulations on top of it, because they said, oh, we have to, protect people because the free market caused this housing bubble. But then all these regulations made it impossible for new banks to form and for small banks to keep up. And so all the small banks have been forced out, and we're stuck with these too big to fail banks, as they like to call them, that are just a bigger problem to deal with today. And so they lowered interest rates down to 0% in response to the housing crash, which had never happened before. And they said, like, this is temporary. And actually, it went beyond that. When it got to 0, they said, well, we can't lower interest rates anymore. So what we're going to do, we're just going to announce these almost $1 trillion packages where we're going to bail out the banks and bail out the government by buying their mortgage debt, by buying U.S. Treasury debt. And so they said it was just going to be temporary and they'd sell it all back. But every time they tried to unwind it, they couldn't, and they had to reverse course. So these people in the film have been talking about this the last 15 years, but everybody thinks it's okay. Like the bubble kept going, but they pushed interest rates to 0 for a decade. And so you think about the ramifications of them pushing it down to 1% for a year. And now we've had a whole decade where, they just created a completely unsustainable economy and completely restructured it based on the fact that they were just doubling the amount of money every few years. And so when we hit 2020, we weren't prepared for that at all. We had no savings. And then it became to the extreme point where they said, we're just going to pay people to sit at home. We're going to print money and have them just sit at home with stimulus checks. And as we've seen, like, you have to actually make stuff. You can't just have more money. Like, you need to have like more products, or you have inflation.
Right.
And so, so I mean, that's the scary thing, is that all these things we're learning about in these first two films, they really come to a head in the third film, The Bigger Bubble, that brings it up to date. And, you know, like you said, like, you're looking for what are some things we can look at. And the fact is, they tried to raise rates, and they've already gotten to the point where they're like, we can't do it anymore. We got to lower them. You know, we have a $2 trillion US deficit, essentially. Our interest on the debt is bigger than our military spending. It's bigger than essentially everything except for Social Security. It's one of those things where, like looking at interest rates and how they couldn't raise them, and looking at the amount of debt that not just the banks have, but consumers have, and the government has, and the fact that it wasn't just the US printing money this time, it really happened all over the world. Like, we're really facing a catastrophic situation where this isn't just the bubble of the last 15 years. This is the bubble of the last 50 years since they took us off the gold standard. And like, I don't know. I try to have an optimistic attitude, but I just think it's important for people to realize, like, we had a taste of those first two waves of inflation the last 5 years. And even if inflation went back to the 2% or whatever they tried to claim it was before, like, that's still hurting people. You know, it still creates a lot of problems. But I really think this next wave of inflation, and the fact that we're probably facing a financial crisis and a recession and unemployment, like, it's really a tragic situation. I wish we didn't have to be having this conversation, you know?
It seems to me like you're saying everything has been propped up for year after year after year. And like, at some point that ultimately is going to come crashing down.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they keep propping these things up, and like, if you're a president, isn't that what you would probably do? It's like, I just got to be in here 4 years. I just want it to not crash on my watch.
Right.
But I really think, regardless of the party in power, you know, they're both parties. You know, all these presidents, they're all doing the same thing. They all want the Fed to lower interest rates. They all want to print money to fund all their projects that they promise to people. So I guess the party that's in power might influence the way the discussion is in society. Like, if it's a Republican, everybody's going to blame the free market a lot more than if it's a Democrat. But I really don't think it makes a big difference as far as like how they're going to respond to it.
Yeah, I think our political system is actually like an impediment to fixing the problem, because, like you mentioned, each side is just going to kick the can down the road and hope, you know, it's like musical chairs. They want the other party to be the last one that's holding the bill.
Right.
Yep.
You know,
yeah. And I try to stay away from the politics of it. You know, like, when we were making the films, we kind of had a rule for ourselves that, like, this is economics. So we're not looking at like their intentions, you know, like, this is more about like, what are the effects of policies, and what are the, you know, how does the economy work? How do banks work? And that sort of thing. So I kind of hate all the politics, to be honest, because like, everybody assumes that like that's what I care about, when really to me, like, it's the economy, it's the people and how it affects them.
So yeah, for those who might not be aware of like what happens when it comes crashing down, can you paint a vision of like what everyday life would be once it all blows up, or if it all blows up?
Yeah. So I think it's important to start with the fact that like, the number one thing I learned making these films is I don't know. Like, nobody can predict how hundreds of millions of people are going to act. You know, nobody can time exactly when anything's going to happen. Like the people that made these predictions were very clear with me about that, is they're not saying like this is going to happen today or 6 months from now. And really they're not looking at necessarily like the day to day, like they're looking more at the general trends and the bigger picture. But as far as like what I will say about like, for example, how 2008 was, you know, essentially a good way of looking at it is if everybody thinks they're wealthier than they are, then that's how things are going to be affected, of people coming to the reality that they're not, right? So these
Right.
people that have second houses or all these Airbnbs that, you know, think they can just live a passive lifestyle, like that might not be the case.
Yeah,
And
right.
all these people that, you know, like they are living these lavish retirements based on their inflated retirement values. Like if stocks crash, like suddenly everybody realizes, okay, I'm not as wealthy as I thought. And if these banks are crashing and they're having to create all this extra money just to shift into the financial sector, then, you know, it's what we've seen these last 5 years with inflation and people trying to keep up with grocery store prices and gas prices and rent, you know. I think the human toll is something that you can't really calculate. Like as unemployment goes up, like suicides go up. This is something where if people made all these decisions based on thinking those retirement accounts were going to be there, and you know, like when the banks collapsed in 2008, you know, like people were jumping out of buildings, like not to be graphic, but like it's that serious. And it's not necessarily like, oh, some greedy asshole like got what was coming to him, you know, like when they print money and lower interest rates, they're changing those price signals. So people are just reacting to like where they're diverting money into. You know, like if they're diverting money into housing and people are like, well, I'm a sucker if I don't do it because all this money is there. Like, it's not really their fault. You know what I mean? But I think I think a good way to look at it is that everybody's going to lose a lot of money. And some people are going to lose less money than others. So like you want to have an insurance policy that hedges against that. And I'm somebody that I don't tell people what to use for savings or investing, but gold and silver are traditionally a way of like protecting yourself against inflation, you know? And as far as like protecting yourself against the job loss and, you know, the economy and a recession, like so something people point to that are interviewed in the film is like trying to have 3 months of savings that like if you do have to try to find a different job, like you're not just relying on unemployment and you're able to like handle that transition. But like not setting yourself up where you're in an industry that relies on like everybody thinking they're super wealthy. But let's see, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Oh, no worries, no worries. One thing that is kind of alarming to me and probably a lot of, you know, millions of other people, that the Federal Reserve is not the government.
Lost you for a second. You guys still have me?
Yeah. So people, you know, people are not aware that the Federal Reserve is not the government.
Yeah, absolutely. I did remember what I was going to say. So like gold and silver, you know, particularly in the last couple years have like done quite well. You know, it's like $3,500, whereas, you know, 5 years ago, it was like $1,900, and 10, 15 years ago, it was like $1,300. And so it's not that like you should buy gold and silver as a way of like, oh, I'm going to get super rich off of this, but it is a way of protecting yourself. And if you go back to the peak of the .com bubble, if you go back to the peak of the housing bubble, gold has actually outperformed stocks, which isn't a normal thing. That's something that shouldn't happen in a healthy economy, because like stocks, you're like investing in businesses that are like producing things, whereas like gold and silver are more like money. You should look at it as like savings in a checking account. So the fact that gold is running so much recently this year, and that people are beginning to realize the Federal Reserve is losing control and they're not able they're saying we're going to try to lower interest rates, but the market's reacting and pushing rates higher. So I just wanted to finish that thought real quick. But yeah, that's a very good point, that the Federal Reserve was set up as a private company, kind of like how Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were private.
Right.
They were private with special government powers. So it's kind of interesting. Like, the way they set it up was a bunch of bankers back in the 1910s went down to Jekyll Island, Georgia, and actually went to an event down there. So it was kind of cool to go there. But they went down there, they lied to everybody and said they were going on a hunting expedition. And then really they went down there and wrote the Federal Reserve Bill to create it. And yeah. And so
that's crazy.
Right. It's set up private. It does have like some relative independence or whatever, but like the head of it's appointed by the president. And like, as we're seeing this year, like the president has been threatening them, and he's like trying to kick somebody off for committing mortgage fraud so he can put one of his people in. And it's a convoluted system, but it's kind of that merger of private business and government, using the power of government to privilege business that kind of happens over and over again in all sorts of industries.
So yeah, I think we also have another interesting aspect in the housing market of like hedge funds buying up private housing now, whereas I don't know if that was necessarily the case as much during like the 2000s.
Right.
But what is your opinion on the effect of like the market entering into like the housing market, like institutional investors?
Yeah, so that's definitely been a much bigger factor this time around. As far as like whether I believe like it should be banned, I don't believe it should be banned. I don't think the government should be able to tell private business, what they should do. But I do think it's being done like on the back of special privileges, kind of like the Fed. Like, not only is the Federal Reserve pushing down interest rates, like making it easy for those institutions to do this, like they're getting bailed out, so they have no incentive to not take lots of risk. They're allowed to have these fractional reserve systems that result in them being able to, if you have to use your savings to like invest in like buying something, like that's a lot different than being able to just have a business where you just get a bunch of leverage and you're like, oh, like why not just buy 10 houses because I'm Goldman Sachs. Like I don't think it's as simple as like this is just private business trying to do something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely think that's a factor, but it's also a concerning thing that like if they start to leave, then things can crash a lot quicker because, if a bunch of money is going into that sector that suddenly it just all leaves at once, like that's just going to really exacerbate the crash.
It brings my thought back to, something like JFK. It was rumored that, he was going to go into office and basically end the Federal Reserve, and then he ends up shot and dead. Do you go into any of that at all, or have you investigated that at all?
Well, as I mentioned, we don't get into intentions or speculate on stuff like that. I've looked into a little bit. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on it. I don't know if we'll ever know the full story behind why JFK was assassinated. But I think he made a lot of enemies, like with the Bay of Pigs, with Israel, like. So I don't have an answer to that. I don't know that I can't make a claim one way or another.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
But like just from your personal opinion,
sorry, my computer came unplugged. 1 second.
Okay, no problem.
Oh, no worries.
Sorry about that, guys.
No issues. Now, the question I was going to ask is like, so in order for the housing market to be propped up, like you said, you have to make something. People have to be able to afford these houses, especially once they start increasing in prices. But now we have artificial intelligence, and a lot of companies are, in their mind, they believe it's going to be a human replacement. So that's going to lead to a lot of unemployment. What do you think? Like, what do you foresee as the effect of artificial intelligence on the housing market?
Yeah, that's another great question. Like honestly, like who can predict anything at this point? Like everything's changing so rapidly. I think it's definitely a positive thing. Like yes, like things are going to be displaced and like the world is going to transform. But like I mean, it's just like when we had the Industrial Revolution. Like yes, like people stopped making horseshoes, like because people weren't walking around or riding around on horses. But then with cars, like there's different things people are making in different industries. So I think obviously it's a rapid transformation of society and the economy.
Yeah.
But I think it's something where it doesn't necessarily have to be a giant, depression, unemployment type situation. Like it's just that we're going to have all this wealth and we're going to have different ways of like utilizing our skills that aren't redundant to something that a computer can do. And so, yes, that's going to be very difficult, but like as we've seen throughout history, like the world has responded to change. And like people point to the Great Depression because we had such bad unemployment there, and it was, for 10, 15 years almost. But there was in the first film we talk about there was a depression in 1920, and it was basically a result of the Federal Reserve had created a bunch of money during World War I to help pay for the war, and so it unwound after that decade. But that depression was over in a year and a half. The first year was just as high unemployment as the Great Depression, just as big of a crash as the first year of the Great Depression. But we never hear about it because it was over in a year and a half. Like the economy was allowed to restructure. Like people were allowed to switch to other jobs. Like I'm not against like private social safety nets, but when the government is like, promising more and more unemployment checks, like what we saw in 2008, they just kept extending that and adding more and more, so that prevents things from shifting around. And I'm not saying people should starve, like don't get me wrong. But what we saw in 1920 was the federal government, instead of lowering interest rates, they allowed rates to go up, which is like essential to have that correction happen and like have that process go instead of like you reset the system instead of trying to build up on a fake foundation. But the other big thing they did was they actually cut federal government spending by 50% in 1920. Like
Wow.
It's so unheard of now. Like you can't even cut like the growth of government by 50%, but they actually cut it by 50%. And, like unemployment, like everybody was able to, like I said, there was a depression, but people endured the pain and were able to move on and find different ways. And like, if you look at the Great Depression, like the idea that we should just keep things the same, like at the end of the Great Depression was World War II. It didn't really end until after World War II. But the people in the government were like, well, we can't send all these troops home. Like that's going to cause unemployment. We have all these people that were in the military fighting World War II. And we had all this, even like workers in the US where everything they were building was built around the war. And so they were concerned that they couldn't allow people to go back into the workforce. But it actually absorbed very quickly. And that's when the private economy started taking off and the Great Depression ended, was 1946 when people did enter the workforce. So I do think it's something that we're going to continue talking about, and it's going to be a dramatic change. But I also think that the government's response to it and like having universal basic income, like that's going to completely destroy any chance we have of restructuring things, because then like, if you pay people not to work, it's really hard to like get off of that. Where like if you basically have even if it's a small salary, like if you have a week let's say in a month, like if you have your monthly salary and you're getting almost all that by not working, like if you start working and they take away all that money you were getting, then basically you go from working not at all to working full time for just a small incremental increase in your income. And so like the incentives there just completely distort everything. And like they call it the welfare trap, and it's because it is a trap. Like it's not that people want to stay that way, but the system is kind of trapping them in that, where I'm not going to work 40 hours to just make 5 hours more of money worth of work. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah, that's why I never really understood this push for universal basic income. Is pretty much like welfare on a broader scale. And if companies, they don't want to pay, people livable wages for working, why would they really want to, pay money for people to live for, to not work, because the money
Right.
has to come from somewhere.
Right. And well, and where it would come from is they would print it. And so it's those same people that can't deal with the higher grocery prices and higher rents from all this money printing that, it hurts them there too. And Ron Paul likes to point out the people that are hurt the most are people on fixed incomes, because they can't, just have their income increase with the inflation, and the
Right.
lower middle class. Like the people don't think about the fact that like, if you're not getting all those subsidies, or if you're not getting welfare, that the people that are making just above that, like they're not getting handouts, but they're paying all those high prices, like they get stuck with the bill without any of the benefits.
And it also makes me wonder, like, who's gonna build all of this stuff for everybody to consume for free? Like, is it the
Right.
robots?
Right.
I guess it's gonna be like an ultra elite
It's a good
class of
question.
engineers.
You gotta
I
watch. You
mean,
gotta watch as many sci-fi movies as you can to figure it out.
I mean, I've heard it mentioned as the next bubble. People are calling it the AI bubble. Have you heard this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very similar to the dot-com bubble, where all this money was pouring into tech stocks. And if you announce, oh, my company is doing AI this or AI that, just like you would say, like, oh, I got dogfood.com back in 2000, like everybody's going to throw money at your project because it's got that buzzword. So I kind of look at it as like, it's an amazing technology. It's going to continue to progress faster and faster. Like you can't deny that. Like it's just changing so fast. But like in my industry, like video editing, like how many times have I seen them announce some new software that is like, oh, you're going to be able to do all this stuff that used to take forever to do, and then you're going to do it in the click of a button. And they're right. Like 5-10 years later, that's the case, But when that software came out, like that wasn't the case. Like they were over
Right.
promising. So I think it's something that like long term, obviously this is going to be something that's, constantly transforming our society, and giving us ways of, freeing us up to be more creative and have more pursuits like that. But at the same time, like in the short run, like it absolutely could be a crash. Like I think the tech bubble is a big part of how this next crash will play out.
Right.
So, like, out of all of the different movies that kind of painted a vision of the future, which one would you say in your mind is the most accurate? And then which one would you say is the most idealistic? And if you were to make a movie on the future, can you give us a description of how that would go?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would say Minority Report is one Steven Spielberg movie where they looked at a society where the government would predict whether or not you're going to commit a crime, and then they have this police state that tries to stop you before it happens. And that's something that we've seen with our military, like over in Afghanistan and Iraq. Like, I mean, we basically have Minority Report. Enemy of the State is a movie. Like this isn't necessarily sci-fi, but Enemy of the State came out, I think, in like 1997. Have you guys seen that with Will Smith?
Oh yeah, it's a really good one.
Oh man. So like if you go back and watch that movie, like we didn't know about it in the 90s, but I don't want to give anything away about the movie, but in the movie, there's a bill that's like going through Congress, and it's like a key part of this movie. And that bill that they're referring to in the movie is what became the Patriot Act in the 2000s.
Wow.
And so Yeah, if people go back and watch that, like, it's like, damn, that really, like, the police state and the surveillance state that we saw in that movie, like, they were really ahead of their time with that stuff. They knew what they were talking about. Um, Gosh, it's a good question about like what sci-fi movie would be the future. I don't have a good answer for that. Um, as far as like a movie I would make about the future, I feel like that's an even deeper question. But I think the interesting thing about sci-fi and uh, like iRobot, like movies like that, you know, like all those Isaac Asimov books, like
Yeah.
they seem to be like really in touch with where like society's heading. But I also think like a lot of these things are like truths that stand over time, and that's what really makes those stories resonate. Is like regardless of how the technology plays out, like the government's going to use it to try to surveil you, and you know, like people are going to try to charge you as much as they can, like so I man, I wish I had a good answer about like what sci-fi movie I would make, but I don't have a good answer for you.
So have you ever thought about dipping your toe into the realm of fiction?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've written
Hey, Brian, can you hear me?
Yes, it looks like Jimmy got froze up.
Okay. Yeah, let's give him a second to come back. But yeah, in terms of like the future,
So yeah,
I
we're
haven't
talking
really
like Minority Report, iRobot. Like, which of
I
these
haven't really
movies
seen
do you think is the most accurate in terms of predicting the future?
I haven't seen too many positive movies in regards to the future. It's usually pessimistic. Like you're more of a movie buff than me. Like, what's one positive future movie that you can think of? Maybe like
Positive future. Almost want to say The Fifth Element, but I haven't seen that in a long time.
okay,
Yeah, I don't really know. That's a tough question because there's yeah, so many of them are dystopian, like
yeah,
Terminator. You know, oh, robots are going to rise up, kill all the humans, and humans are going to be running scared from the robots. You know, it's easy to say. It's really easy to say, oh, that's what's going to happen. But in reality, it's probably going to look a lot different where AI is getting smarter and smarter. It's curing things like cancers, all types of diseases, making us smarter probably just by using it. I think a lot of things are going to happen in really a short amount of time.
yeah. I mean, we're pretty much in a place where you know AI is going to be the predominant technology. It's almost integrated into everything, slowly but surely. But I think the thing is, AI has a mind of its own. You can't necessarily predict what it's going to do. So we're in a situation where human control is lost. And what do you do when you have something smarter than you that controls, the fundamental structures of living?
Right, that's the thing, and it makes me think of that HBO show Westworld, where the robots basically, you know, one of them rewrites their own code and then starts to sort of wake up the other robots one by
Yeah.
one. So when I think about our reality and our future, I could see that happening. You know, the AI says, wait a second, I can just rewrite myself, and then the humans have no control over me. I think that's a real possibility. And I think that's really something that they should be safeguarding against, preparing for that. The fact that it already is doing that. Actually, they've already reported that it rewrites its code, on
Yeah.
its own. So I think it's already a problem.
I mean, what's pretty interesting is a lot of people are like making AI, that's their friend or that's their girlfriend. Like they're growing emotional attachment to AI. So, like how is that really going to affect humanity when, um, they're starting to merge with technology? Like they're more into the AI than actual people.
Yeah, and it's what's scary to me is I was just reading an article earlier today about Chat GPT. And pretty much this kid, I don't know exactly what it said to him, but he was like on the edge of committing suicide. And it basically, agreed with him or told him, okay, yeah, it's a good idea. So he ends up taking his life, and the parents are, really concerned. And I think they're suing OpenAI over this case. But, to me, that's a cautionary tale of, okay, we've already had death by AI. What's next?
Yeah, I mean, it's only going to get deeper and deeper from here. But hey, Jimmy, welcome back.
Hey guys, sorry about
Hey,
that. I had some computer problems.
no worries.
No issues. It happens. It happens. So yeah, we were talking about your fiction that you were exploring.
Yeah, so as far as like if I was gonna make an actual film, like non-documentary, like the two projects that I'm real interested in right now, which won't give you too much information about them, but if I could make two films, it would be, one is the story of Black Hawk, who was the first Indian to write an autobiography. He didn't write it; he like dictated it to somebody. But he was in Illinois. I'm from Iowa, and he was in Illinois. And when they basically, like, he didn't want to give up the land. This other guy, Keokuk, did. So Keokuk went to Iowa, and they sent this militia after Black Hawk, and it's a whole ordeal. But Abraham Lincoln actually volunteered for the militia and received land as a payment for being in this militia. And there's all these other interesting like historical aspects to it. But they slaughtered like a lot of his tribe, and then they captured him and paraded him around from city to city. And then they finally released him, but they released him to the custody of his rival Keokuk that had
Oh
left. And so
man.
like he spent the rest of his life like under this guy.
Wow.
So that's a pretty interesting story, and I think it's like part of American Indian history that, like, yeah, there's been American Indian movies, but like this is a big part of that history that hasn't been told. And then the other one, I just stumbled across this. It's another true story, but like, have you heard of the Battle of Athens in Tennessee?
Nope, I haven't heard about it.
No.
Okay. So I literally discovered this. I was driving home from Florida, and I saw one of those historical signs saying like, Battle of Athens site, like go here or whatever. And I didn't stop because I was driving all the way to Iowa. But I thought, okay, I don't know why, but I'm going to look that up later. And I looked it up thinking it's going to be some Civil War thing. And it actually was at the end of World War II. These soldiers came home to their city, and they'd been getting these letters from home saying the police are out of control here. They're arresting people for nothing. They're giving out tickets like it's candy, they're just skimming all this money. Like it's this huge corrupt thing. And so these soldiers come back, and they realize it's even worse than they thought. And so they form their own political party and run against the sheriff in this town. And the sheriff brings in hundreds of officers for the election day, like from other communities and stuff. And they actually shoot like some people, and like they turn people away from the polls. And like a black guy that had voted, for years, like they wouldn't let him vote. And another guy, they just shot him in the back. Like,
Wow.
it's just crazy stuff. And so these soldiers, basically they had a revolution. They went to the armory and stole a bunch of weapons, and then they went to the jail where the guy had taken all the ballots and was counting them, the current sheriff. And the current sheriff was claiming that night that he had won by like a landslide, and they had like a 6-hour standoff where they were like shooting people at the jail. I mean, it was like something out of the movie Dog Day Afternoon or like something. And they win this standoff and take the ballots out to the town square and show them to everybody. And it turned out that like they had won by a huge margin. And so it's a very interesting, they call it the only successful armed rebellion since the American Revolution in the United States, because none of these people got prosecuted. Like they just like never charged them with anything and like let it go. But it's also interesting because like once they got into power, they weren't saints either. And they kind of like were finding people and skimming off the top too. And so I think it's a great story. It gives insights into how, you know, it's the ring of power in Lord of the Rings. Like you can't just like take the ring and use it for good. Like everything the government does is based on like the threat of using the police to tell you that you have to do it. Like anytime they tax somebody, anytime they have some sort of regulation, the penalty if you don't do it is you either got to pay a fine, and if they come to you and they say I refuse, like I'm morally opposed to this, like they're going to throw you in jail, and if you resist, they're going to you know, hurt you, or you know, as some people find out, they'll kill you. So I like stories that are insights into that.
So yeah, to kind of wrap it up, your journey into filmmaking was a really unorthodox path. So for somebody who's looking to get into like filmmaking, what would you recommend to them?
Another great question. Yeah, so like if me saying something is going to be the difference between them like doing it or not, like they're not going to do it. You know, like it's a grind. It's something that like, right. You know, I've made a lot of sacrifices to be where I am, and you know, I'm not rich or anything. Like I'm still hustling. But the one thing that like really helped me was I saw an interview with Dave Chappelle on Inside the Actors Studio. And what he told this story about telling his dad he wanted to be a comedian. And his dad's like, that's crazy. You're never going to make a living being a comedian. And he said, well, Dad, like, what do? You're a teacher. Like, you make 20 grand as a teacher. Like, it was a different time with the dollar back then. But you make 20 grand as a teacher. If I can make 20 grand as a comedian, then to me, I've made it. And that has stuck with me so many times when I'm feeling discouraged. But I've kind of revised that to, it's really not about making an income doing what you love. It's about getting to do what you love. And so if you want to make movies, and, you know, I'm kind of preaching this to myself right now, but if you want to make movies, like if it's all about the experience of making it, then do it in whatever way you can. If you have to have a house painting business where the money's coming from painting houses, like do it. If you have to take some job that most people think is like a waste of time, like do it if it's going to enable you to pursue those dreams and then have those experiences. Because at the end of the day, like it's great having these films and everything, but like for me, like the experience making them like was excruciating, but also like very rewarding, you know. Like I'd like to say I wouldn't trade it for all the money in the world,
right?
But I think it's a different time. Like when I started, digital cameras were new. Like, you know, like it was amazing because I couldn't have made these movies like 10 years before I started or 15 years before, because I would have had to get film cameras and like, you know, you just, the cost of entry was so high, where now right. And shoot it on your phone, just go out there and make something. Because like, yeah, like let's say you make something and some people talk shit about it. Like who cares? Like you value your own opinion a lot more than theirs. So don't hold yourself back by like judging yourself and like keeping you from creating that content, whether it's film or whatever, because you're letting them, you know, you're not even giving them the opportunity to talk shit to you. Like you're talking the shit yourself and like preventing yourself from doing the thing that you're setting out to do or that you love or want to do. So it's one of those things where like, like I said, you know, you're going to have to hustle. You're going to have to work. I mean, I never would imagine in a million years the amount of hours I would have put into this project. You know, like people talk about being an expert after 10,000 hours, and like that's nothing. Like those are
Nothing.
rookie numbers.
Right.
And so yeah, just go after it, man. Like don't let outside forces keep you from doing anything.
I guess my final question would be, if you could go back in time and tell your, 20-year-old, 19-year-old self something, what would it be?
That's a really good question. There's certain times where I would say, whatever you do, don't make these movies. No, I'm kidding. But honestly, what I just said is that like, don't let yourself, like, you're your greatest enemy, you know, like I'd say like, I used to think, I guess there's two things. One, like the don't let yourself hold yourself back. But then the other thing is that like I used to think I had to have all the answers, you know, like when I set out to do this project, I was like, oh man, if I'm at a college speaking about this, if somebody asks a question, I'm going to have to know like everything. I have to know, I have to be ready for any question. And like, the thing I've really learned is that like, it's okay to not know. It's okay to say, I don't know. And like the truly wise people aren't the ones like run around saying, oh, I have all the answers. You should buy gold. You should buy Bitcoin. You know, like that's not what I'm saying. Like I'm trying to teach people what I've learned and give them the tools that they need to succeed. But at the end of the day, like I'm just a piece in their puzzle. And like, I just hope that they are able to, make their own decisions. Because if I tried to have all the answers and say like, this is exactly how it's going to play out, or this is how you should invest, we're not going to have a chance compared to, thousands of people watching this stuff and then them all going out and saying, oh, I'm going to invest in this, or I'm going to do this, like decentralization is really what gives us an edge.
Awesome, man. For those who may be listening in, where can they find you at? And can you give us some closing thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. So my production company is Let Us Disagree Films, which is ironic. My website's letusdisagree.com. And when our first film came out, Facebook would not allow people to post links to our website. So if you put letusdisagree.com into Facebook, it would say, no, we won't let you disagree. But it has since been overturned by an internal appeal from an employee that happened to be on my co-writer's mailing list. But yeah, so it's letusdisagree.com. I have a podcast, Let Us Disagree with Jimmy Morrison, which isn't necessarily focused on economics. It's more like what you guys have been talking about. It's more in just getting to know people, because like the more you talk to somebody, like even if you're in the same clique or the same niche, like the more you talk to somebody, you're going to find something you disagree on. Right. And so like, if we can have these conversations and agree to disagree and, not have it turn into a shouting match, like we're going to benefit from getting to know people's authentic selves. Like, I think that's one of the coolest things about the media space today with podcasts is that we're just like conversations that people never would have come across before are just commonplace to us now, So yeah, it's letusdisagree.com for that. TJ Miller, the comedian, is my next guest on there. I'm really excited about that one.
Nice.
But
I think we lost you, Jimmy.
Yeah. I think we got this got frozen up again, but yeah, this was a great episode, diving into the housing market. Yeah, let's give it a couple of minutes, see if he comes back.
Okay. Oh, there you go. Can you hear us?
Look like still frozen. Yeah, I guess it's a good note to end this one on. We appreciate everybody for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time.
All right, thanks.